I'm seeing the numbers are coming in. Because of time, and since already our webinar is 1.5 hours, and we're going to keep time at the end, you'll kindly allow me to get started with today's session. Thank you for all those who introduced themselves in the chat. Feel free to keep introducing yourself in the chat. We'll get started with today's session. Let me just share my screen. And I'm going to request that as we move along, if you have any questions, feel free to post those questions in the chat. And we'll keep looking at those as we move along. And we'll try and respond to them once we get to the Q&A session. So let me share my screen quickly here so that we can get started. Okay. So thank you once more for joining us for today's session. And today's session is called Unlocking Innovation, Partnering with Commercial Co-Founders. And I'll do a quick intro, then I'll jump straight to the session. My name is Stephen Gugu. I'm from Victoria Ventures. This is a program we have for today. That's moved. That's the program we have for today. We're already 2 minutes behind schedule, so we'll try and jump through that as fast as we can. The session is being recorded just in case you'd like to view this. It's going to be shared with you right after this. We had a lot of people who registered. We'll also share this recording with them. As I mentioned, if you have any questions at any point, feel free to type those in the chat, and then we're going to pick them up and try and answer them once we get to that point. Okay, so our session today really, it's the key things are three things. I am going to talk a bit about this idea of partnering with commercial co-founders, and I'll speak about just why you need one, how you should evaluate getting a good co-founder, the process of getting into an agreement and so forth. But that's the boring part of the presentation. The more exciting part of this presentation is I have really good two speakers who are really good, and I'm really looking forward to have this conversation with them. One is someone who is a licensing officer at University of Minnesota in the US, our own Dr. Kenny, who has been working with co-founders, with researchers, innovators, in this case, looking to commercialize innovations, and has been supporting a number of them, in this journey when they try to get a commercial co-founder and, push their innovations to market. And I'm really excited to hear some of his views. And then we have Mary Nyaroy, who's an innovator, an entrepreneur, I should say an entrepreneur, who, and they'll get to introduce themselves in a much better way. But Mary started out from a commercial perspective and moved to the technical. She does not have a technical co-founder, but she's really pushed her business. And we're going to be hearing from her what her business does, why she didn't get a co-founder. If she's thinking of getting a co-founder, I think she is thinking of getting a co-founder, some of the things she's thinking about as she's looking at that journey. And so I think it's going to be a very rich conversation. I'm also an entrepreneur in my own right, so I'll also be sharing some of my bits here as we move along. But today is an important conversation. And maybe just to mention a few things in terms of how we're going to approach things for today. I'm just going to do a quick introduction about Victoria and the R2C program, and then jump straight to the session, and then we get to the panel session. So just a few things about Victoria Ventures. We do three things. One is we run an angel network called the Victoria Business Angels Network that makes investments to early stage companies. We've so far done 15 investments, deployed $2 million in those startups, which have raised an additional $50 million. We've worked directly with over 2,000 entrepreneurs since our establishment. And that's within our program management and implementation side of things, and the consulting side of things. One of the programs that we're implementing and that we're running with at the moment is the R2C program, which has been funded by the UK FCDO development, UK International Development, which is FCDO. It's funded directly by RISA, which is funded now by the FCDO. The program is being run in partnership with Kenya, the Kenya National Innovation Agency. And just to mention a few things about the program focuses on two key things. which is strengthening researchers' capabilities to be able to take the innovations to market. And then number two, strengthening institutions to support any innovators that they have within the institutions to be able to do the same thing. So we're working at the innovator level and at the institutional level. We have made a bit of progress so far because we're focusing on these three key pillars. One is the accelerator, the institutional support, and then the ecosystem support. And just a few numbers there that so far the innovators have been part of this. 40 innovators in number have raised over 60 million shillings, which we're very proud of. That's just around $500,000, $550,000. And the TOTs who've been part of this program, and I've seen a number of them here, have already done over 1,000, have done trainings to over 1,000 innovators. And so what we are hoping out of all these is we spread this gospel of R2C and we get all these innovations that we have in our institutions and take them to market, at least the ones that should be going to market. And through that, we're able to change our lives on a day-to-day basis because there's a lot of, a lot of investment into research, a lot of investment into all the different innovations. And if we just leave it at that point, I don't think we're getting the full value that we can get as institutions, as a society, as a country. I'll stop there and I'll jump straight to my session. Now we had yesterday we had a dry run and I want to keep this very short because the panel is really good. So I will skip through some of my slides. I decided not to delete them, but to leave them in, but I'm going to skip through some of them because you're going to get a copy of the slides also if you subscribe for this session. And so I'll mention a few of them that I think are important because I really want us to get to the panel session. And just to start out, I thought maybe even before I put this slide, why is this an important session? So we've been running the R2C program over the last now almost going to 18 months thereabouts. And one of the key things that we found out while we were running this program is that we have a lot of researchers who want to commercialize the innovations. And a number of the researchers who want to commercialize the innovations, there's one challenge that they face. Right? And the challenge that they're facing is the idea that a number of them have a life within the institutions. That's one. They may have some administrative positions. Maybe they teach within the institution, etc. A number of them also have a lot of interest in doing research, and some of them don't feel that they want to go the whole journey in terms of commercializing the innovations because they feel that they don't have the right level of skill to a certain extent for some of them. Some of them feel that they still want to continue doing more research, innovating. And just to take one of the innovators that we had in the first cohort, who after we went through the first training and the second training week, put up their hand and said, what, I've listened to all these and I'm sure I don't want to be, I don't want to be an entrepreneur. If one thing that this has taught me is I want to keep doing my research work and license my innovation into the market. And I was like, that's really good. I mean, that's someone who knows exactly what they want. But there's other people who sort of are trying to figure out how do I take this to the market, and they're asking themselves those tough questions. And going back to the point I was making earlier, that you have limited amount of time because you have admin roles, you're focused a lot on research, you're teaching, and so forth. But then on the other side, you have this expectation or this reality that for you to really be able to commercialize your innovations, you cannot put in, 4 hours a week, 10 hours a week, 40 hours a week, 50 hours a week. It has to be almost a full-time job where even over the weekend, if you're going to have any dreams, they're not going to be about, you on holiday or something. They're going to be about your innovations. When you wake up in the middle of the night and you have a nightmare or you have, a good dream, it's going to be about your innovation, right? It's an all-consuming kind of calling to be an entrepreneur. And so we decided to have this conversation because we think there's a number of innovators that may feel the need to get a commercial co-founder to support them on this journey of entrepreneurship, either because they feel, they need someone with that kind of skill set, or maybe they just don't have the time to be able to take that from there. That's not the only option, and you'll get to hear from Mary, who's gone through a different journey, and I think that's an interesting journey by itself that you're going to hear about. But that's why we decided to put this session together. Now, first things first, and this is an important point. And I won't define entrepreneurship. I think I've seen there's a number of entrepreneurship faculty here, and they may call me out on the definition I use. But the point I want to make is there's different types of businesses. And the talk that we're having today does not apply to all types of businesses. And now there's a nice report that was done. It's called the Missing Middles report by CFF, Collaboration for Frontier Finance. And they did this report I really like, which tries to classify the different types of businesses. And they look at these from three different angles. The first one is, what's the ambition of the entrepreneur? Do you want to create something that is truly scalable, that, I don't know, grows across the country, across East Africa, across Africa, across the world? What's your ambition? Right? And that really matters, because there's people who've not asked themselves that question, whether they're creating a lifestyle business or they're going all out. The second thing is they look at what's the competitive advantage, or, how innovative is what you're putting out into the market. Right? Is it something that has been done previously? Is it, is it a trading business, for instance, where you're just importing laptops and selling them? Right? There's no innovation there. Anyone can do that tomorrow when they wake up. All they need to do is just to have the capital and the connections to be able to do that. Is it that type of business, or do you have a new cure of cancer, for argument's sake? And then the last thing they ask is just how big is the market that your product is targeted towards, and how fast is that market growing in this case. And so with those three attributes, then they classify three different types of businesses. The first type of business, actually four types of businesses, but I like calling them three. The first two in this case are what you call very disruptive kinds of businesses, creative businesses in this case. And these are businesses which, from the day zero, the innovators who are behind them are looking to scale them across. They have a big market, and innovators are very clear about that kind of perspective, right? There's a certain level of competitive advantage in this case. Leave the examples here. I'm not going to spend so much time on the example. And then you have the other two types of businesses I'm just running through. And the last one is what you call the livelihood sustaining business, which is your typical small shop that you set your mama mboga, or small shop that someone set to put to sell groceries and so forth. Or just a typical SME. You start a woodwork business or a tailoring business, and you're just doing it, and it's making sense. You're generating a bit of income and so forth. But really, your ambition, the size of market, how you structure the business model, does not lend itself for scale in this case. Now, the conversation we're going to have today is going to be focusing on the first two types of business, the high growth ventures and the niche ventures. And that's very important, because it's in those kinds of situations that we're saying that entrepreneurship is all consuming. Because in the other two types of situations, entrepreneurship is not all consuming. If you look at the person who has a small grocery shop, I mean, they close the shop over the weekend and they go and they relax and don't think about it, because they've generated whatever they need for the week or whatever it is. But really, if your ambition is to go for it, then at some point you're going to have to ask yourself, can I do this by myself? Or do I need someone else who's going to support me on this journey? Yeah. And so then, what do you need then to build these kinds of business that I'm talking about? And generally speaking, and this is not the only way of thinking about it, but I like this way of thinking about it. You need three things. The first is the human capital, right? And the human capital speaks to the skills. And if you're a researcher who has an IP that they've registered, you probably have the skills, because you've created something novel, you've got an IP registered and so forth. But that by itself is not enough to take this to market. The next thing you need some financial capital. Financial capital is just the funding that you need to be able to take this to market, whether from grants, from equity, from debt, whatever it might be. You need to raise funding. But then just having the money and having the skill set is not enough also. You also need the social capital. And the social capital is really what we call the connections at the end of the day. Because you need to be able to, I don't know, maybe it's a B2B product. You need to have to get to a certain, maybe it's a pharma product, right? You need to get to one of the big pharma companies. A connection there might help quite a bit to be able to unlock a couple of doors, sign an MOU, sign an agreement, etc. And generally, I like this. It's simplistic, but it speaks to really just generally what you need. Of course, we say that the ideal is this right at this point here, where you have all of them. But the reality is, not all innovators have all these things when they begin. And it's not, the expectation is not that you should have all of them. The expectation is you should have access to them. So there's people who know that I am very good from the connection, from the technical side of things, but I'm going to need someone who's going to help me to raise funding because that's their skill set or whatever it may be. I'm going to need someone who I think is very good in terms of these marketing aspects, in terms of creative connections, etc., that kind of thing, right? And people will get these things from different places. It could be you get a really good co-founder who's able to answer some of these questions. It could be that you're part of a board that's able to answer some of these. You put a board together that's able to support you in some of these things. It could be that you're in an incubator or an accelerator that's supporting you in some of these things. So there's many ways of getting it, but today we're focusing on getting a co-founder who's trying at least to address some of these things. And I hope that's clear there. I'm just looking at the chat here. Yeah, okay. So we keep going. So do you need a co-founder to start your company? Well, if you look at the unicorns that have been created, they seem to imply that for you to have a unicorn, you need to have a co-founder. So in out of 1,000 unicorns, 75% of them had a co-founder, 25% did not, right? And so, probability of you creating a unicorn is high if you have, if you use the data that's here, is high when you have a co-founder. I don't think necessarily it's just having a co-founder, it's having the right co-founder. The right co-founder, because just having someone else you call a co-founder does not necessarily help you. But the journey for entrepreneurship is not an easy one. So you do need a co-founder at some level. And there's many reasons towards that. I'm not going to go through the entire list here. Emotional support. There are times that things are just tough. And you're going through a tough time and you need someone else who can pick you up and run with things. We say that fundraising is a full-time job. And at times you need someone who can focus on that bit as you're focusing on the operations of the business. Just earlier today, we were having a chat with one of my co-founders in terms of structuring the business, and I was saying, what we need to structure this in terms of who's going to focus on the technical aspects, who's going to focus on the running of the business. Right? You're able to split roles, basically. You're able to split roles in this case. It supports in decision making, where you can have someone you can bounce off ideas. When you wake up in the middle of the night and you have a crazy idea, you don't wake up and just do it. You speak to someone else, tell you that's a bad idea. Please don't do that. Right? So it's good to just have someone. Risk mitigation in this case. You share the profits, but you share the risk in this case. So there's many reasons, basically. I don't think they're the only reasons, but it helps when you have a co-founder, and investors love co-founders. Right? When you sit in a company and you find a company which has a co-founder, in this case, you say, there's someone who's they're working together. One of the key things that you ask yourself as an investor is, if one of the team members is not able to work for one reason or the other, who's going to take up? Right? If you have a co-founder, that's really good. Also, the skill sets. We don't all come with all the same set of skill sets. We have different skill sets. So, for investors, that makes sense in this case. Okay. So in terms of how you would go around then identifying a co-founder, there's many things to think about. And as I mentioned, you're going to get the slides and we're going to have a good discussion in this case. But at the core of it, for me, is it needs to be someone that you can work with. Someone that you can work with. Let's leave all the other things. And by the way, one of the way I was thinking about this talk, because I was really thinking about it yesterday, and as we were preparing for this, is almost like getting married, right? If someone asks you what is the one thing that you need to get in someone that you're gonna get married to, there's many things. You could have a list of a million things. You want them to look like this, to be this height, to be ta 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 ta. But at the core of it, you need to share the same value system. At the core of it, you need to be able to walk through the journey, ups and downs, in a way that you feel there's a certain level of trust. You will not fight with each other and say, let's let it go to. You need to be able to work with them. So the value system for me is probably the most important thing. But then after you're done with the value system and you feel that clicks to a great extent, you want to have complementary skills. If today I was looking for a co-founder, I wouldn't get someone who can check off the same box I can check, because I know that there's some boxes that I am weak on in this case as a founder. If you remember back to the technical skills, the financial skills, the social skills, if you want to call them that, back to that, just that, if you just use that as a basic. If I find myself I'm very good technically, I'm going to look for someone else who's going to fill the other boxes in this case, because that helps from a team perspective. Remember that as a company that's getting started, one of the key challenges you'll face is being able to recruit really good quality, middle level, and top level talent. And so if you have a co-founder who answers that, they're very good technically, they're very good from a financial perspective. They save you a lot of headache because you know that that's one less thing I need to worry about because this person has it covered 100%. And I don't have to pay for it. And I know that whatever happens, the back stops with them. Right? That helps a lot. The complementary skill. There's several other things here that we can speak to. I'm not going to get to them, but I'll speak about that complementarity and the value system, honesty, integrity, and so forth. So some questions to consider if you're looking for a co-founder in this case is, to a great extent, you want someone who really is not coming in to be an employee. Because for me, for you to be labeled as a co-founder, you need to be able to take a certain level of risk in this case, which is important. I need to bring a certain level of skill set on top of that into the business that helps us to move forward. Right? If someone is looking at this from a job perspective, that they're getting a job in this case, they're not gonna, technically, they're probably not a co-founder. Of course, that doesn't mean that they cannot get paid. They should get paid because someone is spending quite a bit of time in this case. They need to love the problem that you guys are solving in this case. They need to. It needs to be one of the key things that they want to solve because forming a company, a successful company, is not a short-term agenda. It's going to take you, 10 years, 20 years, etc. And so you need someone who really is willing to spend a lot of their life focused on this problem and solving the problem that you believe in this case is one that you're trying to solve. Track record is very important in this case. How do they work with other people? They're at a co-founder level, they're going to be managing people. So you want someone who is able to manage people pretty well. And of course, based on the kind of skill set that you say that you need for your co-founder, you want to make sure that they check off that skill set, whether it's from a finance perspective, from a technical, from whatever bit they may have in this case. Very important, as I mentioned, they want to solve the problem and they're not coming at this as an employee. They're coming at this as a co-founder, which means they're willing to go the extra mile, even if they're not getting paid at the moment. They're looking at the future in terms of what kind of impact can we have into the future. In terms of where you get co-founders, and we'll discuss this, but there's different places to get co-founders. At times it's friends, it's your networks, right? It's people that you've been discussing with about this, and you just scan your network and you find, I've been talking to this person. Whenever I go talk to them, they have interesting ideas in terms of what we should do. They have the right kind of skill set in this case. I trust this person. They have the same value system. And all you do is just say, hey, can we have a chat? I've been looking to work with someone. Can we work together, right? And maybe you created that relationship over a period of time. And then someone says, okay, you know what? Actually, I would love to work on this. So just look within your networks first. And by the way, it might be the most unlikely of characters in this case that are going to be your co-founder. They don't have to be your friend. It could be just someone within your network that you just have conversations with. Could be, and I found very interesting conversations of co-founders. I even found investors who quit their job to become co-founders because they care about the problem. They see the opportunities that lie, in solving that problem. And so you've been talking to this investor, you're talking to them, they're at a particular level. And one day you tell them, hey, I'm looking to do this. I tell you, what, actually, what, I wouldn't mind looking at that as an opportunity. So the idea is don't lock yourself. Don't imagine that your co-founders are going to come from the university only. It could be that, it's someone that you meet for, a drink every so often or a coffee every so often just to talk about different things. But they are in their career, they feel that they're not having as much impact. They have a lot of experience. And you just tell them, hey, I've been looking, so open it up. If not, we have the more formalized kind of ways. If you're within an incubator, accelerators, like for instance, we have a really good incubator and accelerator in Kenya that is called, and now I'm forgetting it. I'm going to tell you what it's called in a bit. And their work is actually just to create this relationship between co-founders. So we have Jasiri Talent Investors, where they invite you as an innovator to come on board. And within the program, they pair you up with someone. It's a Rwandan-based accelerator program. They pair you up with someone and you look to then work together from that point. We also have Antler, which is based out of ABC. That's what I was looking for. And they bring you in this case, and you formulate problems, and then you get into a team, and then you start working together. Those are the interesting spaces that you can. But basically speaking, incubators, accelerators, some of them, they can be able to help in terms of putting some of these conversations. Of course, yeah, let me leave it at that. So in terms of how then you'd go around, so like looking at your co-founder in this case, it's important that you ask yourself, what do you need in a co-founder? It's not it's a job description to a certain extent, but it's also a value description. What exactly are you looking for? What do you think you're missing as an innovator when you're looking at different co-founders? And I think Dr. Kenny will speak about the different types of co-founders that you can have in this case, based on the place your business is at that particular point. Right? So it's important you ask yourself, what do you feel you're missing in terms of taking your business to the market? And then on that basis, it helps in terms of starting to look in this case. Then, of course, there's the networking in this case, talking to different people. So it's not the first person you talk to who tells you, I'd love to do this. You're not desperate. At least you should not be desperate to get a co-founder. In the same way, if you remember, if you want to get married, please do not be desperate, right? It's not the first person you meet and you're just like, let's go for it, because it's a long-term relationship. So you want to make sure that you do your due diligence. You spend a bit of time getting to know the person, in this case, before you move to other direction. Evaluate the potential co-founders in this case. Jointly define some milestones. And I would say, as you're going through this journey of getting a co-founder, if you can, please work with someone else who's supporting on your side. Because often you might imagine you're a very good judge of character, but if you have a board of advisors, if you have a couple of people that advise you, a mentor, etc., a coach, whatever it might be, as you're sort of like discussing, what should I get in a co-founder? That's something you may want to just discuss with them before, so that they also help you to enlarge that list that you're looking at. And even after you go towards now the evaluation, once you've gotten the people, you have some profiles, you say, okay, these are some people I'm considering because of 1, 2, 3. Please have a conversation. It's always good, especially when you're trying to get into these long-term type of relationships, to be able to move the conversation forward. Now, of course, very important that you define exactly what you expect from this co-founder, especially in the beginning in this case, so that someone is clear in terms of what are they going to be doing for the company, what kind of milestones would you be expecting in this case. It's good to have, even if those things will not be met A to Z as expected, but it's good to have that in mind because it helps from the perspective of either having that person succeed in this case or knowing whether you're making the right kind of moves in this case. There are bad co-founders in this case, and there's many points you could speak to in this case. I would say just for me, and we've spoken about the attributes of a good co-founder in this case, is integrity issues are a big issue. One of the books I really like is written by a guy called Noah Wasserman. It's called the Founder's Dilemmas. And Noam Wasserman says this. He says, this is in the first chapter. He says, if startups were like battlefields, most of the casualties would result from friendly fire than from enemy fire. If startups were like battlefields, most of the casualties would result from friendly fire than from enemy fire. And I think he speaks about the idea that there's lots of startups that end up collapsing because of team dynamics, where you bring in someone or you're working with someone and you cannot resolve issues and this person controls 50%. There's a startup I remember, which is an interesting story, where there was a technical co-founder who for some reason had not transferred the IP. This is a technology startup. For some reason had not transferred the IP in the tech that had been developed into the company. And so that came under his name. And then you had, I guess, the other founders, commercial, if you want to call it that, in this case. And they joined in and they're working together. And then at some point, they had a disagreement. And this guy walked away with the IP. So basically walked away with the company, so to say, at least the technical part of the company, right? And the company died at the end of the day. But the idea here is that this is such an important decision that if you get it wrong, it can also mean, life or death for your company in this case, right? And so, and we'll speak about some of the things that you can do. This idea of having targets and having vesting is such an important thing, and I like talking about it a lot. And vesting is this idea that if you're bringing a co-founder and you're gonna reward them using a bit of cash, using shares in the organization, you don't come in on day one and tell them, Stephen Gugu, I'm gonna give you 20%, and here's your 20%. No, you give the shares on a vesting schedule. Say that, when we sign, you probably get 5%. After we achieve these milestones, you get another 5%. If you achieve these milestones, you get another 5%. Then we achieve these milestones, you get 5%. And this is also time-based. It's over maybe the next 24 months, over the next 48 months, and so forth. And these are negotiations you're going to be having, of course, at the end of the day. But what this ensures then is that also you are aligned with the person who's coming on board, in this case, as a co-founder into your business. Okay, I'm seeing there's people who are hiring a co-founder. That's good to hear. I'm just looking at the chat here as we move on. Thank you. Some interesting conversations going on in the chat. Please make sure to look at that also. So I've mentioned a few things there. I mean, I've spoken about the wrong co-founder and what that means for a business, so I'm not going to spend so much time here. Now, just like any relationship, let's assume that you've gotten someone and you're working with them. And I'll speak about the agreement. I'll share some slides on the agreement that you could sign. A co-founder relationship has to be nurtured. And it's very similar to a marriage at the end of the day, right? And that means, you're having regular conversation to make sure that, you're getting to understand each other, how you make decisions. You're getting to understand what are the strengths, the weaknesses of my co-founder on the other side. And that means that then regularly you're having lots of conversations. You're also fighting, right? Because you're going to fight. I've been an entrepreneur for the last 12 years now. And, I've been in tough conversations with my co-founder, right? Where at some point, I will not, let me not say some of the conversations. We had some really tough conversations at times, because at times we see things very differently. I'm like, we should go this direction. Then they're saying we should go the other direction. Maybe it's a recruitment decision and you're very clear and they're very clear in this case. And you'll have fight. And that's okay. To have fights, it's okay. But you need to find a way that you're going to then come back and to make up and then try to, move on. And these are just some of the ideas in this case. Communicate what your roles and responsibilities. I agree in terms of how you keep each other accountable. If someone has not done something, how will you keep each other accountable? Because one of the things I see with co-founder relationships is where people don't want to discuss the difficult things, because it's a relationship where everyone has almost equal power. So it's a bit difficult at times to bring up things, but you need to be able to bring up those things and say, hey, Mary, you've been slackening up because things are not moving on your side, and that's affecting what you're doing, right? Steve, this is happening on your side, etc. Right? So very important. Good to have a relationship outside work, because it helps a lot when you're having conversations in this case. Of course, you need to be aligned on the different aspects I've mentioned in this case. So in terms of setting goals, I won't spend so much time on this. Of course, you want to have smart goals, break them into targets in this case, accountability, tie the targets to incentives in this case, be flexible, adapt, etc. I mean, there's many things that we'll speak about. I really want to get to my session here. But this section is an important section about founders' agreements. And you need to have some sort of an agreement, especially if you're bringing in a co-founder on the other side. It's not an employment contract. Very important. Yeah. But it's an agreement just similar to an employment contract in this case, that speaks to, what the expectations are. This is what you need a person to do. What are the targets that we're looking at? If we are successful, what happens? If you're not successful, what happens? How are we going to resolve issues when we need to resolve any issues in this case, right? And in the next few slides, I'll try to detail a number of these, and we'll sort of get to the panel and see, what especially from Dr. Kenny, what he's seeing in this case from inside. But ownership structure, roles and responsibility, your description of the business purpose. Do you have any revenue targets, number of customers, key milestones? And this is not to say all agreements should have this, but some of the agreements could have some of this information. And this is just, a list that captures a lot of the things in this case. What's the decision-making authority? What can they make decisions over? And what decisions remain with you? What's the decision-making process, right? Do they have to refer things when, this is such an important thing, because also, as I mentioned, it's a relationship where you find that both parties have a certain amount of influence and power. And so it's very important that you're clear, how do they present themselves in the media? Can they go to the media and speak about certain things, or are you the one who's going to be doing that? I mean, some of those small things, you need to just have a conversation about them in this case. What types of decisions require unanimous consent, right? Now, of course, as I'm doing this presentation, I'm also keeping myself on track because this is the ideal. This is the ideal because even in most relationships, you find that these things have not been discussed and they only become discussed once someone has done something and then you're just like, no, you cannot do that. You cannot recruit and you're not agreed. No, we've just come from there's a deal that I was involved in and we were at a almost like a co-founder relationship. And one of the key things that we fought over is that they went and hired a very senior member of staff for the entity. And that became such a big fight because then they were just like, yeah, but this is a good person. What is the issue? And those guys were just like, you didn't follow the right process. How do you know this is the only good person that could have hired in this case? So, what's the decision making in this case? Which ones require unanimous decision making in this case? What's the compensation that the person is going to be getting in this case? Are they going to get a salary? Are they going to be getting dividends? Are they going, how exactly, what shares are they going to be getting if they're getting any shares? That's a whole conversation that you need to get into with this person in this case. IP, how is the IP, going to be recognized in this case, assuming it could be within the institution. In this case, if it's within the company, that's very easy. Because then they're getting shares within the company and the IP is owned within the company you're looking at. But there could be some discussions there. You need to have confidentiality clauses. This idea of non-solicitation and non-compete is such an important one. Because also you don't want a co-founder who comes on board and after the relationship breaks, you find that they've started something separate that is very similar to what you are doing and they're competing with you now. Right? And especially in a situation where you didn't jointly develop the innovation, in this case, or the IP. Right? And so this is something that you want to have within your agreement in this case to just protect yourself just in case it doesn't work. And remember, it's normal for it not to work. Not all, this is sad to say, but not all marriages work. And that's for a good reason, right? And so, I mean, I've just told you that I was in a business arrangement which I thought when we started signing the agreement a year and a half, almost 2 years ago, we had lunch. It was the whole shebang. It was one of the best. I thought I was in this relation for the next sort of like 8 years, 10 years of my life. And then after a year, we started having fights and we've had to terminate the agreement. I mean, I could not see this coming when we were signing this. So it's normal for these things to happen. And so it's good to think about some of these things. And then something I learned out of this is also ask, what happens when there's a deadlock? Please don't have equal power. If there's a deadlock, who's going to shift things on the other side? How will you resolve disputes? Yeah. Now, one of the key things we didn't do in this co-founder relationship we're talking about, it's an interesting point. We never defined. So we agreed on targets and all that stuff, but we never defined that, every month, let's meet and look at the targets afresh and ask, where are we, where aren't we here, etc. And so it's like we left things for quite a bit of time. And then it's almost like a year and a half later, we look at the things we had agreed on. And then we find out that a number of them have not been achieved. We've not, on our side, we've not achieved everything. On their side, they're not achieved everything. And then it becomes this big fight. And I think we could have sorted this out by just having a clear dispute resolution mechanism. And we know exactly how we can start addressing things as early as possible, especially in the first year. Very important that you speak about those things. And don't underestimate how culture affects parties in terms of how they deal with conflicts. And some of these things you only realize once you're in the midst of the conflict, and especially if you're not planned those things very well. And then, of course, termination and removal. If it doesn't work out completely, then what happens? Good to think about that and to ask some questions in this case around that. That was 101 into getting, a co-founder. As I mentioned, I didn't want to take so much time on this part because I do have a really good, panel, and I want to get into the conversation. So we have two people here who I'd like to bring into this conversation. The first one is Dr. Kenny Karanja, who's a technology licensing officer from the University of Minnesota in the US. Dr. Kenny is a Kenyan, and he's doing a lot for this ecosystem. I think I've had the pleasure of spending a lot of time with Dr. Kenny and having long conversations, and I think he has his heart right into the R2C ecosystem in this country and moving it forward. And always bringing all the experience that he's getting from the other side of the world. I'll allow you to make a quick introduction in a bit. And then you have Mary Nyaroy. And Mary I got to meet a few weeks ago, and she pitched in a session that I was in. and I was quite impressed by her pitch and what she's trying to do as an entrepreneur and her journey as an entrepreneur. We had a longer chat yesterday, and it's really impressive to see someone who's left a cushy job somewhere and believes in something very core which has a lot of impact, and then is looking to make that come alive. Moving from finance into some serious science. Some of us, I don't know which one is easier, whether it's moved from finance into sort of like technical stuff or from technical to the other side. I certainly wouldn't want to go to the technical side of things because I'm just like, I want to be a generalist as well, but Mary doing some great, amazing stuff. So let me introduce you guys. Let me allow you guys to just make a quick intro about yourself. You can speak about your company, what you do on a day-to-day basis. If you want to mention one or two things that you thought were interesting, not interesting from the presentation I just made, you can just mention those, and then we can now jump to the question that we had said. Yeah, thank you. Mary, over to you.
Okay, great. I think we're following the ladies first thing. Thank you so much for this opportunity to speak. I really, again, learned a lot. I think one of the beautiful things about the entrepreneurial ecosystem is you're constantly learning. And I'm so happy that you're having this conversation, especially for researchers who want to jump into the entrepreneurial boat, because this is the advice I would have wanted to have when I was starting. No regrets though, but it's really amazing. And to introduce myself, my name is Mary Nyaroy. I'm a solo founder. And interesting, I'm going to give my thoughts about this journey and co-founding as well. And my company is called Nyungu Africa. We have innovated sanitary pads from pineapple leaves and corn husk fibers, or what you call maize, which is a common name in Africa. And again, I'm excited to be here. Oh, yes, one thing. I think one of the things I really was when I was nodding my head is having a co-founder is equal and important to having a marriage partner. So it's like, and I mean, the threshold of having a successful startup is 10 years. So that's 10 years of constant stress and laughter, sharing the responsibility of profit, loss, and stress. So it's something really to take your time in finding a co-founder. So I'm really, again, looking forward to share my journey. Over to you, Dr. Kenny.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Stephen. So my name is Kenny Karanja, and as Stephen mentioned, I'm a technology licensing officer at the University of Minnesota. So my daily bread is earned from helping academic scientists, inventors, entrepreneurs to move their technologies from what we call the wet bench space or dry bench space, depending on your field of study, into the marketplace via startups or licensing opportunities. So as Stephen mentioned, my key role really is to catalyze those relationships, bringing people, founders and co-founders together and trying to establish a marriage. I'm a marriage matchmaker, so to speak, with very little at stake. So I am objective to make sure that that marriage works. To Stephen's comments earlier, one thing that popped in my mind is this thing, a phrase that goes that culture eats strategy for breakfast. And the reason you want a co-founder, one, nothing against you, Mary. I think you're doing a good job. N of one founder is not a culture really, because you drive everything. You're the boss, left, right, and center. But if you have multiple co-founders, you are establishing a culture. So at the get-go, you want to get that culture right, because oftentimes when things go wrong, they don't go wrong. Things start wrong. So you want to make sure that at that foundational level that you're establishing a culture that will sustain your enterprise. And glad to have this conversation going forward. Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kenny. And I like what you said about culture. I mean, we could spend a whole tangent just on the culture aspect, but let me stick to the to the script for today's session. Mary, let me start with you. First of all, as I mentioned at the beginning, there's a number of innovators who, they have full-time jobs, right? And they're trying to push the innovation forward. And one of the key messages we're always trying to communicate is, you know what, if you're not gonna bury yourself into this thing, it's not gonna work. And I just wanted to just find out from you, as you're telling us about your journey, and maybe you can speak about just your journey from founding and all the way to where you're at as at today. Just and also just share just how much time do you spend on this? Is it a side hustle?
This is not a side hustle. This is my everyday, day-to-day work, and actually even night. Sometimes, I think I was telling you yesterday, I slept at 4 a.m., which is something I don't want to advise entrepreneurs. You need to have balance. But when you're running a startup, just like every business, because well-being is very important, right? And my journey. So as you mentioned, I have a background, or rather I worked in the finance industry for 6 years at one of the largest finance institutions in Kenya, KCB. And when I was working there, I had started curating on Instagram about female health reproductive issues. And once I was there is when I was exposed to the harsh realities of period poverty. You know, listening to news that Kenya is the third country in the world with the highest rate of teenage pregnancies. And of these pregnancies is because school-going girls have to trade their bodies, sleep with men to get 50 to 100 shillings to buy sanitary pads. A product that I don't have to think about. You know, it's cheap for me, but it's very expensive for school-going girls. And also, you know, the depths that the school-going girls also have to do in terms of, you know, using makeshift products. So that is what really inspired me to really find out why is a product that is so cheap, because I have privilege, also expensive to a lot of women and girls. And also listening and realizing that the products that we have in Kenya and mostly Africa are substandard products. So if you compare period products in Kenya and those ones in, you know, the developed countries are not the same. So that's why women complain of constant itching and irritation. So I got from this finance background, and then of course I went in to become a mobile journalist. So I have a few stories when I was working for Citizen TV. And then because I was so interested in period poverty, I started shooting social impact stories. So I went to interview homeless women in Nairobi to really find out what kind of products were they using during their periods. And then again, it was very grotesque in terms of women were using cardboards. There are some women who use used pads. They take pads which have been thrown, they wash them and they use them in this at this particular time that we are living. So listening and, you know, getting to experience firsthand what these women were going through was really something I was like, this cannot continue happening. And now I started doing the research. You see, coming from a finance background, I've become a mobile journalist. So I was like, I was so motivated to look for a solution. And I normally say that my journey, when the dots are joined backwards, it was inevitable for me to start Nyungu, because here you are, you've been exposed, I have privilege, I have gone to these places where women and girls are not able to afford sanitary pads. And I live in Thika, which is the pineapple capital of Kenya. So I'm seeing pineapples every day. I've eaten, I think, thousands, if not millions of pineapples since I got to Thika, which is 24 years ago. And so I'm doing research, and I find out that the raw material that is used for sanitary pads is wood pulp, so that the absorbent material and wood, they extract something called cellulose from the wood pulp. Cellulose is the most abundant raw material in the world, and it's found in plant fibers. So I connect two and two together. Again, I'm trying to condense my story because there's so many nuances to get to becoming the founder of Nyungu. And that's when I, you know, started getting research, or rather, and looking for strategic partners to be able to get my idea, because I was like, if we need cellulose to make sanitary pads, pineapple fibers are plant fibers and they have cellulose. So converting the research that I got and the idea into something tangible is when I had to do the connecting with the strategic people that I'm going to be talking about later. And to answer your question about how much time I spend on this startup. Now you can imagine I do not have any scientific background. So, and I've had to meet and talk with some of the most brilliant minds in this world about what I'm doing. So I've had to teach myself. Sometimes I say I'm a scientist by application because you will see me scrolling through those research papers. I'll be talking about nanocellulose and all those big terms in scientific papers to these people, and they're like, okay, you know your stuff, that's good. And I think it's one of the things that, in terms of being a solo founder, is by the time I was thinking about this idea, I was not thinking about a co-founder. I had a pressing need to solve this problem, right? And if you were to do it the other way, is I would advise somebody, if you have an idea and you cannot be able to have traction before having a co-founder, then start by looking for a co-founder. But if you can be able to make traction without a co-founder like I did, because I had the idea, the raw materials are abundant. I needed to find the strategic partners, is now get the idea moving so that you can get investors and then look for a co-founder later. I think I've jumped through the question of having a co-founder, but yeah, that was my journey.
No, thanks. And it's a conversation, so I don't want to keep it to a script, so to say. But I like that last point where you say that if you have an idea and you don't feel you can make traction very early without a co-founder, please get a co-founder as fast as you can. And I think if I look at some of the the research-based innovations, I get the sense that at times you do need to push your innovation till a particular point. So that you can say, okay, there's something here before you can start inviting other people. Because if you don't do that, then there's really nothing for you to be able to show. And let me bring in Dr. Kenny here. And so, Kenny, you spend day to day, talking to different innovators and supporting them in this journey of commercialization. Now, let's focus on this idea of just getting co-founders in place. And I guess for me, the question for you is, at what point does someone say, I need a co-founder? Or did you tell them you need a co-founder at this point? Because it can be at the point where they're in the lab and they're trying to figure out the scientific space. Maybe you can speak to us about at what point, and then also just speak to us, how does someone then think about the different types of co-founders they would need at different points? Because I'm sure there's only one,
Right.
there's only one point.
Right. So for us, because we deal with faculty members, and I think part of your introduction was your interaction with academics in this case, that have to decide if they are going to remain academics doing research, teaching, and extension, or they want to add to their hat something to do with entrepreneurship. So the first thing we work with them is to understand their motivation. Why are you thinking of a startup? Is it that you want, you're interested in the entrepreneurial path, that you want to grow that skill and maybe transition yourself out of academia into the business community? Or are you trying to make sure that your innovation/invention has a broader public application? And of course, concomitant to that is, you might get some revenue out of that if it meets a specific problem that people are willing and able to pay for it. So based on that conversation, we have an understanding of whether that person really needs a co-founder, or initially they might want to do it alone, as you just mentioned, to further develop that asset outside the university, but with a plan to have a co-founder at some point down the road. So once we have some clarity around that, then we can negotiate a way of helping that person get a co-founder. And the way we look at that is we broadly define that as you have the inventor or the innovator, and then you have at the early stages of the startup, you have what we call a driver. And a driver is someone who will complement that innovator, mostly with business skills, so that they can establish a business structure, understand what kind of organization you're going to put together, a limited liability company or a partnership or a corporation. So that business person would bring that into play at that particular point. And that is what we would call a driver. And subsequent to that, if the asset is and I would say 90% of opportunities are where you need an inventor, academic innovator, and the driver, which is in the early stages, is a CEO. However, in those 10% of cases where we have some advancement in the technology, where you've already figured out maybe a value proposition target market, and you need both a driver and what we would call a builder. So the builder is a founder who brings in technical aspects of the operation of the business. So for example, if you are manufacturing something, someone who has done that before, has that specific industry experience. If you're in the pharma space, someone who can help you understand the regulatory framework for your pharmaceutical or medical device, if that's what you're going for. So that's the kind of skill set that we look for in that co-founder. About 10% of our opportunities are there. And then finally, which is basically very few, none of them is where you have a guide. And a guide is someone who has a much more broader strategic vision for the corporation. This is another CEO type person who can then, blow up the company, scale it up, go broad, go international, talk to high-level institutional investors. In that kind of co-founder, we normally don't deal with them in the day-to-day operations that we do. So we mostly want to bring the innovator and the driver type CEO at the early stages of the opportunity so that they can help put together the right structure. And as I mentioned, the right culture. So you want to, and we'll talk about this later, how to find that particular driver with that particular early need kind of skill set.
Thanks. I was taking notes here. But I like that idea of the driver, the builder, and the guide in this case. And I probably see why you're saying that the guide is probably not someone you need very early, because the guide comes, and I've seen these kinds of situations where you have a company, and maybe it's let's use an example that we use a lot in Kenya, right? If you remember, Michael Joseph and Bob Collymore, right? Bob Collymore for me was the guide. It's someone who's done this severally in different markets, and so you bring them in once you know the building is in order, but it's just not where it should be, and the work is then to sort of like take it to the next level in this case. And I think if you bring in a guide very early, they probably won't be able to answer some of the questions. So let me come back to you, Mary, and let me ask. So you don't have a co-founder. You haven't had a co-founder so far. So how have you gone around, filling in for this role of, co-founder? Because, we say a startup is more than 48 hours. Sorry, it's more than 24 hours a day. How have you been able to, navigate that journey till now in this case?
Well, I think one of the beautiful quotes I live by is from a book. I forget the name, but it said that life, just like business, is a human enterprise, right? So honestly, the traction that we've made as Nyungu Africa has not been a one-woman show. I don't work alone. And the beauty is that the gaps have been filled, the co-founder gaps have been filled with strategic partners. I have been able to get into very great accelerator programs, for example, Techstars, which is one of the most successful early stage accelerators in the world. And the good thing about Techstars is that you have an array of mentors and advisors you can be able to match make who help you to make decisions in the company. Because as I said in the beginning, once I got the idea, I did the work, day and night, going through research papers, going to offices like Kirdi to be able to get, the innovation going. And once you have something to present to investors or would-be investors, a prototype, that is much easier now to be able to have those conversations. So Techstars has and continues to be such a great support system for Nyungu Africa, because I'm able to brainstorm if I have issues with, like right now we are fundraising, because fundraising is a what did you say? It's a 100%. It's the JD of the founder. So that's typically what we're doing, or rather what I'm doing is always trying to meet with would-be investors. And that's how we were able to meet, I think a few weeks ago, because we were pitching for funding. So that's how we've been able to do it. So Techstars has been one of them, and of course, applying to this accelerators. Another one is Circular Economy Accelerator in Germany. So what I do is look at the business and the accelerators that will be able to give us the most value. So because we're a circular economy startup, or rather I applied for a circular economy accelerator to be able to get the great minds of circular economy to plug into the business. And because Techstars is an agnostic early stage accelerator, so you have a lot of investors in different industries that I can be able to plug in. Then you'll get technical expertise from there. You'll be able to get financial expertise, product market fit expertise from there as well. So plugging into those areas is what we've been able to do.
Now I'm going to apologize. Can you hear some blaring noise in the background? Oh, thank God, because there's someone who's come with a truck. They're pumping water next to where I am. So, but I can hear you, and I'm glad that you can hear the feedback. So, Mary, let me stick with you and let me ask this question. Have you missed having a co-founder? Are there times you wake up and just like, this load is heavy, I wish there was someone else that could do this? And how have you navigated that?
Of course, and I think that's why, Dr. Kenny, your point about having a guide is really resonates with me, because I feel like with the strategic partners, we have been able to create enough traction now on the route to commercialization. And I feel like the sweat, the years of R&D, the sleepless nights, I'm just like, man, I just, having my own Bob Coleman and be like, so now this is what we've done, now take it and move. And, I'm just there like, okay, good, yes, I like it. So I do require to get a co-founder as a guide. Actually, I do need a guide now, because when you look at Techstars, these advisors, you have to allocate time and be very intentional, because these are people who already have their own things going on. So having a guide who's now hands-on in the business is very important. And I do recognize that. So I'm in the process. We've already started having conversation of how this person and the kind of skill set they should have. And ideally, yes, I am looking for a guide. Or co-founder.
Interesting, thank you. And I hope you do get a good co-founder, because that would be success by itself. Okay, Kenny, let me come back to you. And so Mary has just mentioned she's at this position where she's looking for a co-founder. So from then, from your position and the experience that you have, how does someone now start navigating that journey? How do you support that journey to be able to get to a point where someone has gotten the right match, knowing that this is one of the most difficult and the most risky decisions for your business? And so far, this has been your baby, right? Right. And then all of a sudden, you have to share the baby with someone else.
Right. Yeah, yeah. You hit the nail on the head there. I think so I like telling stories, so I'm going to tell this story. Kind of captures the thought that you just laid out there. So we had a very prominent investigator over 25 years looking for new modalities to treat pain. You see, there's this whole opioid epidemic. There's a lot of concern about the inavailability of medications that don't trigger dependency and addiction. So they've worked in this field for a very long time, and they have a very beautiful baby in terms of a small molecule drug that can be a substitute for opiate-based therapeutics. And so the idea here was to match make this particular investigator with a co-founder. And I think part of one of your slides was someone who is too attached to the technology may not be a very good co-founder. So in this case, we had to let this person understand that you're going to be giving up an arm and a leg of this baby that you have spent 20 years creating. So the mistake that was made initially was not to lay out that a co-founder is not an employee. So this particular investigator was expecting an employee. So the one thing you want to understand as a founder, and when you're looking for a co-founder, is that that person is not an employee. The reason they're not an employee is because even though you might have to give them an arm and a leg of your baby, meaning a substantial equity position of your company, you want to do that because you want them to have skin in the game. You want them to be able to dedicate that 60, 70, 80-hour weeks to thinking about strategic partnerships, to thinking about fundraising opportunities, thinking about the incubators and accelerators you would have to apply for. So you want their heart and mind in that opportunity. You may be the parent of this 20-year-old baby, but you understand that if you are going to stay in the academic ecosystem, the entrepreneur ecosystem is a whole different beast. So you want to be, at least, you know, they say there's a 6-inch separation from the mind to the heart, but it is very critical. You have to, as an innovator, which is the people who are my client, you have to inculcate that in your heart, that yes, you have to give up a piece of something very valuable to you. However, it's an exchange with the co-founder that you're bringing in, that they are also bringing in something of value as well. So that is a conversation we really try to have at the very onset, so that that difficult conversation, though at times you must have it, we try to avoid having that early on, because then it sets us back. Because part of our process is to matchmake. I go and look for people who are interested in becoming co-founders, evaluate their skill set. As you mentioned, you know, we have a list of things and opportunities we have worked with the investigator to identify as what they need in a co-founder, and then I do the initial screening. So I need to have that conversation earlier on, because in this particular horror story, the person that I had brought in then told me, hey, that whole conversation we had, you thought I was looking for a job? And then, you know, I had to sweat and apologize profusely. So we have to make sure that that alignment is done pretty early on, yeah.
And can you just continue then on the same tangent of you know, having those difficult conversations at the beginning with these with the co-founder, with the person who's coming on board and so forth. And I really like that point that you mentioned, that you know, you're not getting an employee, right? And it needs to be very clear, because if you come at that perspective, then you know the fights begin for the one group, because someone has a different expectation and so forth.
Right.
But now, just if you speak about it just practically, and I'm going to ask Mary how she's taking up. Maybe I should ask Mary how she's taking her process, and just how you take your process. Uh, so Mary, let me just come to you first. So Mary, you said you're looking for a co-founder at the moment. How are you approaching that journey? I mean, you have a beautiful baby. Probably the baby is now walking. I don't know whether they're walking or they're crawling. And so you probably can say, you know, I can take care of this baby. I probably don't need someone in this case. So your standards are quite high, I'm sure. What are you looking for? How are you going through that journey? Maybe just to share some of the things you're thinking about.
So it's interesting, Dr. Kenny, you mentioned about having, it's very important to have the hard conversations. I think one of the mentors that we have, or rather I talked to, because when I reached out to them, I told them, now I'm really looking for a co-founder. And she told me that avoiding difficult conversations from the onset gives you short-term comfort, but long-term challenges as you move. So it's important to have hard conversations when you begin. And one thing that was mentioned was in terms of having a moral code, because I was seeing today on LinkedIn about somebody who had been invited to go and speak in Germany, but because they have been talking about the conflict happening in some countries, they were told not to speak. So even understanding the moral code of the person you're bringing in the team. For example, I'm a strong advocate against GBV, but if I'm looking for a guide who has a prior history with domestic violence, I'm definitely not going to have them as a co-founder in the team, just because they have good credentials in the street. When they come into a company, they make 10 times of the profit. So for me, having a great value system is important. And number two is agreeing on the financials. Again, there's some people who just want to exit when the company gets X amount of money. And there's some who want to have an IPO. So listening to somebody who wants to take it slow to grow the company, and me, for example, maybe who wants to see the company to grow exponentially, have different kinds of branches in different African countries. So understanding the kind of person who, in terms of the financial goals of the co-founder as well. And number three is sharing the profit. I mentioned the profit and the loss and the stress according to the ratios that you talk about. So I think one of the biggest things is how this person is going to handle stress, because entrepreneurship is a long journey, probably 10 years, as I mentioned, of constantly making decisions, doing the boring work, and conflict resolution. So how does this person handle stress? And in terms of looking for a co-founder, I know there are so many people from the school of thought of going to network, which is great. Get matchmaking, platforms like Founders List or Founders Factory. This is places you can get co-founders, or the co-founders lab, which is great. But remember, this is a person you're going to be working with for almost 10 years. So ideally, the first place to start is people you already know, and then have conversations with them. So one of the things, at least, and I mentioned yesterday, is throughout this journey, I've had people who have worked with us from, or rather with me from day one. So it's now having those conversations for, do you think we can be a co-founder with you? Because you've seen the things we've gone through, the pitfalls we've gone, and now understanding what they're willing to trade off to become a co-founder. And if that one doesn't suffice, is now going to the networking, because I'm also an avid networker. I go to these places where people, startup founders go to, and try to see people and talk to them. So that's also another route to use.
Mm-hmm.
And Mary, I really like that point about having a 10-year horizon, right? I think it's such a strong point for someone just to have at the back of their mind. Kenny, coming to you, what's your process? Because you do organize marriages, so to say.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
What's your process? And is there a dating period in this case?
Yes.
Or you, once people come, you just tell them you have to get married today, starts tomorrow?
Yeah, that's a good point. So what we do, we have our own. So maybe this is where kind of the University of Minnesota has some differences, or maybe even our own ecosystem in the US might be a little different from the Kenyan one. So for us as an institution, we're a pretty big institution. So we have a huge pool of alumni, almost 500,000 alumni. We don't always reach out to them, all of them. For this case. However, we have a very small cohort of very engaged, about 400 individuals. We call it a business advisory group. So that is the first pool that we reach out to when we have an opportunity for which we are seeking a driver co-founder. So we present a case, a very short description of the technology, and those people who are interested can, raise up their hand for consideration. We also ask them to provide us, contacts of secondary people that they might know. And then we have a conversation with them. As I mentioned prior, we have a list of what the founder is looking for, mostly technical in terms of business technical, not scientific technical. So if you're looking for regulatory affairs, primarily we look for fundraising experience. So we startup experience, someone who's done a startup before or been involved in one prior, and fundraising experience. And then we also do a due diligence. I like your point, Mary, about ethics and values. So for example, we have women and minority-led founders who are looking for women or minority co-founders. So we take that into consideration. And we do a due diligence. I remember one time we were doing one and we found a very highly talented individual. We do Google searches, we do LinkedIn profiles, and we did a Google search. And that person had been sued, lo and behold, by a previous startup 5 years prior for, guess what, embezzlement of funding. So that was a absolutely no-no. So that name was put aside, even though they had a very attractive LinkedIn profile. They had been highly recommended to us by one of our internal back members, business advisors in that case. So once we identify that and they have the right business skills, we then have a conversation with our founder. And the first thing we do is expectation management. So as Mary mentioned, this is a long-term relationship that is being established, 5 to 10 years. And we want to make sure that the person we bring in, at least for the initial 5 years, they don't require a salary. This might be a hard sell in the Kenyan context, but they should be able to sustain themselves at least for 2.5 years with zero payment, and maybe the next 2.5, if they get funding or grants and other sources of income, then they can be compensated. I think we'll talk about that point at a later point. And so if they are okay with that understanding, then we bring them together with the founder, of whom we've had the same conversation, and they're expecting this person, and we introduce the same. And then I take a back seat, and we do about a month of pre-marital counseling, so to speak, and them getting to know each other, meeting outside my presence, and either party is okay to reach back out to me individually and find out what we are thinking. And if the team fits and there's both a cultural fit, interest fit, then our minimum is usually, we say 2, maximum 5. We don't want to do 5 co-founders. It's 2 that there's no need at that stage. So 95% of companies are between 2 and 3 co-founders. So the scientist, a CEO, and maybe a technical person or a part-time technical finance person at the very beginning, and they're all compensated by equity consideration. But yeah, that's the process we do, and then they have to sign the agreements downstream.
Wow, 1 month.
Yeah, it's
speed
dating. Yes,
that's speed dating the whole way. Out of those that go through this 1 month process,
right.
What proportion ends up being green, and what proportion is just like hell no?
I will say it's a high proportion of 50-75%, but this is the beauty of the whole thing. None of these people are random strangers.
Yes.
So this connection we make is they are not getting to know each other for the first time. Normally, it actually turns out it's a co-founder who knew someone, and that someone knew someone. So there was already some background knowledge among those people. So the 1 month is really more in terms of we are now going to get this done, and we are ready to go. But the background work, that most of them probably know each other or know of someone who knows them. So there is a lot of networking, as you talk about social capital, that goes in there. And I think that's a good point, because one thing, we do have quite a bit of married investigator couples. And that's a whole different kettle of fish when the husband and wife are co-founders and they bring in a third party. So that's usually one of the more difficult conversations. But it's an expectation management. There's this whole thing about forming, norming, storming, performing thing. So we want to lay out that the initial time, there might be some conflicts, but as long as you're aligned in your goals, your culture, and you are a good fit, it ends up working out. So the 1 month sounds like a short time, but there's a lot of other background work that has gone in between. Yeah.
And that's important. And Kenny, maybe one of the key, because I know I've heard about that journey where we take Mary and someone else and tell them, you guys think about it, and then if it doesn't work out, Mary is just like, actually Ken is on organizes marriage. I never wanted.
yes.
How do you go around?
Right.
How do you manage that bit?
Right, that's a very good point, because we absolutely want to stay away from that. So we make it very clear. We make it clear that this is, for us, because our main client is the academic investigator, we make it clear that you don't have to go with this person that we bring. If you find someone else, just bring them. We'll do the vetting. We have to vet, because the asset is owned by the university, so we have to vet that person, but the decision is theirs. So you made a point about vesting. We make it very clear that they have to, our vesting schedule is 1 year, 1 year cliff. So for 1 year, nobody is vested. So that's sufficient time to take care of the 1 month speed dating, right? So they have a 1 year vesting schedule, vesting cliff, and then after 1 year, if it's not working at that time, it's not going to work, and then they can start vesting prior to that. But yeah, vesting is one of the things we do to mitigate that risk. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. And now let me just come back to Mary, and I have 4 minutes. I'm wondering which question to ask. Because I feel like we need a part 2 for this conversation, because we've barely scratched the surface. But I'm going to ask one question to you, Mary, and one to Candy, because I like respecting time. We're going to organize the part 2 of this conversation, because we've barely scratched the surface. So, Mary, keeping people accountable. Right? I mean, so far you're working with partners, and even with partners, you do need to keep them accountable. And maybe even asking, when you're thinking about the co-founder you're going to bring on board, how do you start thinking about this question of accountability, and how do you go around that journey? Because it's such an important thing when you have these relationships where you're working with another party who's joining you and supporting you in the business.
Again, to echo what I mentioned before, I've been very fortunate to get into accelerators or incubators where these people have done business, or rather assisted startups for not hundreds of years, for very many years. So they have processes and systems that work, and borrowing those systems in the startup has been very helpful, because one of the things that we do as a startup is sending updates to the investors. So this is what is working, this is what is not working. We need assistance with A, B, and C. And because of the pool of resources that Techstars and even other accelerators that we've been to have, it's very easy now to be able to plug in. And then again, when you're forming these relationships, for example, we had something called Mentor Madness at Techstars. We met so many mentors and investors. And after the conversation, they are given, much like what we did with Angels Academy. So did you like what Mary said? And then now you have to match make, and then you start building the relationship. Again, it's a thing of relationship building, because once somebody is sold to the vision, they really love what you do, they love you as a personality, it's very easy to work with them, and you keep each other accountable. So when you Slack, they're like, what's happening? We've not received the monthly update. Is everything going all right? Because they're equally invested in your success as much as you are in the success of the company. So that has been very easy for me, but I know it's not going to be easy for people in university trying to get a co-founder. So it's very important, one, to know what you want to work with, or what you love and what you don't love, and also mirroring these qualities in a person. And that's why I said having a moral code is very important. Somebody who complements your skills is also very important. I'm very cognizant and very sure about, I want a guide for the company. So somebody who has skin in the game, just like Dr. Kenny said. So those are the things you need to know. What you do want and what you do not want are very important. And finally, again, one thing I love that you said is the founder's dilemma. One of the quotes I loved about in that book is that 65% of the businesses fail due to team conflict, right? So it's important to have a conflict resolution mechanism when you're starting, having those hard conversations I said, and also having a decision review process. And something I liked from one of the programs I loved called Billions, which I would love every startup to watch, startup founder, is something called a post-decision review process. So you're a founder, you have somebody else, maybe the co-founder, and then you've made a decision. Maybe you, with the biggest control rights in the company, you've made a decision. So you sit down with the co-founder and you ask yourself, why did you make that decision? What motivated you to make that decision? So that you can be able to, follow up on the things that you're doing. And I see I've eaten up the time that Dr. Kenny needs to say something. So again, we need to have part 2 of this conversation. I agree with you, Jackson Muthengia. So SG, over to you. And again, Dr. Kenny, please.
No, we are going to have a part 2. Phyllis, I think you've had that. So let's agree we're going to do this probably not next week, the next week, the other week, about next week. But Kenny, 2 rapid fire questions. Someone who asked, how do you compensate? What's sort of like ballpark in this case? Right. And I think important that we also discuss this, because I think Mary raised about this conflict management and so forth. First of all, what kind of challenges do you see often coming up once people have started this journey? And how do you advise that they go around resolving them successfully in this case, so that they don't get up in the 65%? And then after that, we'll close. So just give us another 4 minutes and then we'll finish. Kenny, over to you.
All right. So yeah, the first one is we've covered it quite extensively, accountability. So we recommend that our founders have a cadence where they meet every so often and have that ongoing conversation. As part of the asset owners ourselves, we require in the agreements we have with the startup that every quarter they give us a written report And every year we have a catch-up report because we are also investors. We, the university, also invest in the startups. We have a 10% equity holding in all our startups. So that way they can have an ongoing conversation. The advantage our startups normally have is that they have me and my counterparts, where they can come back to us if the startup is having an issue, or if not the startup itself, but the people in the startup are having an issue, and we can help address those conflicts as much as we can. Sometimes it does come to the founders firing someone, and if that's the best decision for the company, because there's a statutory obligation to do what is best for the company. So legally, what's best for the company has to be done. So if worst case scenario, our co-founder has to be fired, then that has to be done. But we are always the sounding board for any disputes that initially arise. The equity consideration, that's a topic a deep conversation we have with our founders. So if they're going to be inactive founders, we are looking at about 5%, no more than 10% equity is if they're inactive, meaning, you're talking to them once a couple of months. If they are active co-founders, in the case of 2 co-founders, the incoming driver CEO gets a majority stake, so 51%. And then our co-founder, if they are going to be actively involved, it depends on what that active means. So they may get up to 30% of the company. The university takes 10% equity and then a 10% reserve pool for employees. And then subsequent to that, we get diluted. I saw a question about how do you divvy up equity if the company is already cash flowing? Often our startups are not cash flowing. They're extremely early. But in the time when we are cash flowing, very few of them are in the software space. They might be at the get-go, but majority are not. In that case, you already have a valuation for the company. So you can really value in monetary terms, dollar figures, what that CEO compensation might look like, and then you can backtrack that into an equity stake in the startup at that point. But most of us are not cash flowing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Thanks, Dr. Kenny. Thanks, Mary. I'm not going to ask for closing remarks because we've not finished.
Right.
Those are asked for in the next section. So thank you so much for being with us and for that very powerful conversation, because I think there's lots to pick out and to learn from these and the experiences that both of you have in this case. There's lots of questions everybody's asking. Can we have the second part? Can we get the slides? There's questions that are coming up in this case. So we are going to get in touch, and probably week after next, we schedule another session just as a follow-up. And we can try to wrap up this conversation, at least cover a bit more of the other questions that we had.
Right.
Thank you, everybody, to everyone who's been able to join us today. We will get in touch for the second bit. You'll get access to the recording and to the slides. Please submit any. We'd also add a poll so that you can ask your own questions, and then we can spend a bit more time in the next session also answering some of your questions. So as I'm saying, Sana, do have a lovely evening or morning and rest of the day for yourself,
Great.
Kenny.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye.
Yeah.
Bye.